The last transport ship lifted off from the surface of Kepler 442b with a roar that shook the ground. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the command bunker as the blue flames disappeared into the dark sky. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the cost had been terrible. Jake pressed the radio button on his console. Command, this is Forward Base Delta. All civilian evacuations complete. Military personnel ready for extraction. Static crackled through the speakers. Then came the voice of Admiral Brooks from the flagship orbiting high above. Delta Base, we have a problem. The transport ship Meridian just suffered engine failure. They're making emergency repairs, but it will take 6 hours minimum. Jake looked around the empty base. His team of 12 soldiers had already been evacuated on the previous transport. He was the only human left on the planet. Understood, Admiral. I'll wait for pickup. Negative, Captain. We just received word that Centauri reinforcements are moving toward this system. The fleet needs to leave now, or we risk losing everything. Jake felt his stomach drop. The Centauri were humanity's enemy in this war. They were ruthless alien warriors who showed no mercy to prisoners. What are you saying, sir? I'm saying we can't wait. We have to leave you behind. The words hit Jake. Like a physical blow, he stared at the radio, unable to speak. Around him, the base hummed with automated systems, but everything else was silent. Captain Morrison, do you copy? Jake's hand shook as he reached for the radio. I copy, Admiral. We'll send a rescue mission as soon as possible. Could be weeks, could be months. Your orders are to survive and maintain the base. That's an order, soldier. Yes, sir. The radio went quiet. Jake walked outside and looked up at the sky. He could see the bright dots of the human fleet moving away from the planet. In 10 minutes, they would jump to hyperspace and be gone. He would be completely alone. The planet the locals called Vorthak was not a kind world. It had 2 suns, but they were both small and gave little warmth. The air was thin, and the gravity was stronger than Earth's. Most of the planet was covered in gray rock and dead soil. The war had made it even worse. Jake walked through the base, checking supplies. He had food for 3 months, maybe 4 if he was careful. The water recycling system worked, but it was old and might break down. The power generator had enough fuel for 6 months. After that, he would have to rely on the solar panels. He found a bottle of whiskey in the officers' quarters and poured himself a drink. The liquid burned his throat, but it helped calm his nerves. He was 32 years old, and he might die on this alien world, forgotten by everyone he had ever known. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins of the nearby town. The Vorthaki had lived there before the war came. They were small creatures, about 4 feet tall, with hard shells like insects and big round eyes. Most of them had fled when the fighting started. Some had died in the bombing raids. Jake had seen them during the war, hiding in caves and broken buildings. They reminded him of scared children, even though they were adults. Their technology was primitive. They had barely discovered fire when the Galactic War arrived on their world. The next morning, Jake began his new routine. He checked all the systems, sent out a distress signal on the emergency frequency, and tried to keep busy. The base was designed for 20 people, not 1. The silence was crushing. On the 3rd day, he found footprints in the dust outside the base. They were small, with 3 toes, clearly made by Vorthaki feet. Someone had been watching him. Jake grabbed his rifle and followed the tracks. They led to a pile of rubble that had once been a house. He could hear quiet clicking sounds, the way the Vorthaki talked to each other. He approached slowly, his weapon ready. A small head poked up from behind a broken wall. It was a young Vorthaki, its shell a light brown color. Its big eyes looked at Jake with fear. The creature made a high-pitched noise and disappeared back. Behind the wall, Jake lowered his rifle. "Hello," he called out. "I won't hurt you." More clicking sounds came from the rubble. Jake could see movement, but the Vorthaki stayed hidden. He stood there for several minutes, then slowly walked back to the base. The next day there were more footprints. This time they came right up to the base wall. Jake found small objects left by the fence, colorful stones, pieces of metal. What looked like dried food? The Vorthaki were leaving gifts. Jake had studied their language during the war, but he only knew basic words. He tried calling out to them in their own tongue. Kethnala meant peace friend in their language. He repeated the words several times, but got no response. A week passed. The gifts continued to appear, but Jake never saw who left them. He started leaving his own gifts in return. Energy bars, water tablets, small tools. The items were always gone by morning. The weather was getting colder. Jake knew that winter on Vorthik was harsh. The temperature would drop below freezing, and the wind would carry ice storms that could kill anyone caught outside. He had enough supplies to survive in the heated base, but the Vorthaki had no such protection. On the 10th day, Jake found something different among the gifts. It was a small carving made from wood, showing a tall figure standing next to several smaller ones. The tall figure looked human. The smaller ones were clearly Vorthaki. Jake stared at the carving. They were watching him. They had been watching him since the day he was left behind. To them, he was a giant, a mysterious being with soft skin and strange powers. His technology must seem like magic to them. That night, a storm hit the planet. Jake was safe inside the base, but he could hear the wind screaming outside. He thought about the Vorthaki hiding in the ruins, trying to survive the cold. Many of them would not live through the night. When morning came, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He put on his heavy coat and boots, grabbed a bag of supplies, and walked out into the aftermath of the storm. The ground was covered with ice, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. He found them huddled in a cave at the edge of the ruined town. There were about 20 of them, adults and children, all shivering in the cold. Several looked sick. One of the children was not moving at all. Jake knelt down and opened his bag. He pulled out thermal blankets, medical supplies, and food. The Vorthaki watched him with wide eyes, not sure if they should run or stay. Kethnala, Jake said softly. Peace friend. An older Vorthaki stepped forward. Its shell was dark with age, and one of its eyes was clouded over. It looked at Jake for a long moment, then made a complex series of clicking sounds. Jake didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. The old Vorthaki was asking for help. Jake nodded and began treating the sick child. He used his medical scanner to check its vital signs, then gave it medicine and wrapped it in a warm blanket. The child's breathing improved and its eyes opened. The other Vorthaki began to crowd around Jake, chattering excitedly. They had never seen medicine work so quickly. To them, Jake had just performed a miracle. As Jake worked to help the others, he realized that his life on this planet was about to become very different. He was no longer just a stranded soldier waiting for rescue. He was now the only hope these people had. The old Vorthaki approached him again and spoke a single word. Tethren. Jake didn't know what it meant, but he could guess. It was probably their word for healer or helper, or maybe something even more important. He had crossed a line that day, and there was no going back. The human fleet was gone. Earth was far away. But Jake Morrison had found a new purpose on this cold, broken world. He would help these people survive, no matter what it cost him. He just had no idea that they would one day call him their god. Winter came to Vorthak like a frozen fist. The temperature dropped so low that Jake's breath made clouds in the air, even inside the base. Outside, the wind howled day and night, carrying ice that cut like knives. The two suns barely showed through. The gray clouds, giving almost no warmth. Jake had been on the planet for 2 months now. The 20 Vorthaki he had helped were living in the caves near the base, but more kept coming. Word had spread somehow that the tall, soft one was helping survivors. Every few days, Jake would find new groups of Vorthaki waiting outside his fence. Shivering in the cold, he could not turn them away. The base was not built for this. It was a military outpost designed to house 20 human soldiers, not a refugee camp for dozens of aliens. Jake had to make hard choices about space, food, and heat. He moved his own quarters to the smallest room and gave the larger spaces too. The Vorthaki family's communication was still difficult. Jake knew maybe 50 words in their language, and the Vorthaki seemed to understand only a few human words. But they were learning fast. The children especially picked up new words every day. One of the young Vorthaki, barely 3 feet tall with bright green markings on its shell, started following Jake everywhere. The others called it Zix, which seemed to be its name. Zix would watch Jake work with huge eyes, copying his movements and trying to help with simple tasks. Jack, Zix would say, pointing at him. The Vorthaki could not pronounce his full name, so Jake had become simply Jack to them. Water, Jake would say, pointing to a bottle. Water. Water, Zix would repeat, the word sounding strange in its clicking voice. Jake learned that Catherine, the word the old Vorthaki had used for him, meant something like protector of the weak. It was a title of great respect in their culture, given only to those who risked themselves for others. The medical bay became Jake's second home. Every day brought new patients. Some had injuries from the war that never healed properly. Others were sick from the cold and hunger. Jake used his military medical training to help them, but his supplies were running low. The fabrication unit in the medical bay could make basic medicines, but it needed raw materials that Jake did not have. He started sending Zix and the other young Vorthaki to collect specific plants and minerals. They brought back everything he asked for, even when it meant traveling far from the base. Jake discovered that the Vorthaki had their own medicine passed down through generations. An elderly female named Keth knew which plants could help with pain and fever. She taught Jake about local herbs while he taught her about human medicine. Together, they saved lives that neither could have saved alone. Food was another problem. Jake's military rations were designed for humans, not Vorthaki. The aliens could eat some of the food, but it made many of them sick. Jake had to learn what they could digest safely. The Vorthaki were naturally plant eaters, but they could eat some meat in small amounts. Jake used the base's hydroponic garden to grow vegetables, but it was not enough for so many people. He started teaching the Vorthaki how to tend the plants, how to harvest seeds, and how to prepare soil. Zix was the best student. The young Vorthaki learned to read the water levels and nutrient mixtures. Soon, Zix was taking care of entire sections of the garden without help. Other Vorthaki saw this and wanted to learn too. Jack teach became a common phrase around the base. The Vorthaki wanted to learn everything Jake knew. They watched him repair equipment, organize supplies, and maintain the base systems. They started helping with simple tasks, and Jake was surprised at how quickly they understood complex ideas. The power generator was Jake's biggest worry. It was old and starting to make strange noises. If it failed, everyone in the base would freeze to death. Jake spent hours working on it, trying to keep it running just a little longer. One day, while Jake was deep inside the generator housing, he heard excited clicking from outside. He crawled out to find Zix and 3 other young Vorthaki standing around a pile of metal scraps. They had organized the pieces by size and type, just like Jake had taught them. "Jack fix," Zix said, pointing to the scraps. "We help." Jake realized they had been watching him work and collecting spare parts they thought he might need. The metal was from destroyed vehicles and buildings around the base. Some of it was actually useful for repairs. "Good," Jake said. "Very good." The young Vorthaki made happy clicking sounds. They were proud to help their single quotes Sisesha and Dodd. As winter deepened, Jake faced a new challenge. The Vorthaki were starting to see him as more than just a helper. They brought him their disputes to settle. When 2 families argued over space in the caves, they came to Jake for judgment. When someone stole food, they expected Jake to decide. The punishment. Jake did not want to be their leader, but he had no choice. Without some kind of order, the growing group of refugees would fall apart. People would starve and freeze. So Jake made rules, simple and fair ones that everyone could understand. No one takes more food than they need. Everyone who can work must help with daily tasks. The sick and injured get help first. Children are protected above all else. The Vorthaki accepted these rules without question. To them, Jake was wise and fair. His word was law because he had saved their lives. They started calling him Catherine Jack, which meant something like Protector Jake or Guardian Jake. Jake tried to explain that he was just a human, just a soldier who had been left behind. But the Vorthaki did not see it that way. They saw a giant who could heal the sick, grow food from nothing, and create warmth in the coldest winter. They saw someone who shared his own food so they would not starve. One night, Jake woke to find the entire group of Vorthaki gathered outside his room. They were standing in a circle, making soft clicking sounds that rose and fell like music. It was beautiful and strange, unlike anything Jake had heard before. Keth, the elderly female who helped with medicine, stepped forward. She carried a small object made from carved wood and polished stones. It was a pendant, hanging from a cord made of plant fibers. "For Catherine, Jack," she said in careful English. From all people, Jake took the pendant and looked at it closely. It showed a tall figure standing in the center, with smaller figures arranged around it like the spokes of a wheel. The tall figure had its arms outstretched, as if protecting or blessing the others. "Thank you," Jake said. "It's beautiful." But as he looked at the carving, Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The Vorthaki were not just grateful to him. They were starting to worship him. The next morning, Jake found small offerings left outside his door, polished stones, dried flowers, pieces of food. The Vorthaki had started leaving gifts for him like they might leave for a deity. Jake tried to stop this behavior, but it was too late. The pattern was set. Every morning brought new gifts, new signs of reverence. The Vorthaki began to copy his habits, eating when he ate, sleeping when he rested for the night. When Jake worked on the generator, they watched in silence, as if witnessing a sacred ritual. When he tended the garden, they saw him bringing life from dead soil. When he healed their sick, they saw miracles. Spring finally came to Vorthak. The ice melted, and the first green shoots appeared in the rocky soil. Jake's small group of 20 Vorthaki had grown to over 100. They had survived the worst winter in living memory, and they had done it because of one human who chose to help them. But Jake was beginning to understand that he had started something he could not control. The Vorthaki saw him as their savior, their protector, their guide. They were becoming dependent on him for everything, and Jake worried about what would happen when his supplies ran out, when his equipment failed. When he inevitably made a mistake, he was just a man, but to the Vorthaki, he was becoming something much more. Something that scared him, something like a god. 3 years had passed since Jake Morrison was left behind on Vorthak. The small group of 20 Vorthaki had grown into a community of over 500. They had built permanent shelters around the base, using materials Jake taught them to make. What had started as a refugee camp was becoming a real town. Jake stood on the observation deck of the base, watching the Vorthaki go about their daily work. They had learned so much. They could repair simple machines, grow food in organized farms, and even make basic medicines. But they still looked to him for guidance in everything they did. Zix, now taller and with darker markings on its shell, climbed up to join Jake on the deck. The young Vorthaki had become Jake's closest assistant and translator. Zix could speak English almost as well as Jake could speak the Vorthaki language. "K-friend Jack," Zix said, "the water pumps are working?" "Well, the new filters you designed are cleaning the water perfectly," Jake nodded. The water system had been one of his biggest projects. He had used parts from damaged military vehicles to build pumps that could bring clean water from the underground springs to the town. To the Vorthaki, it was another miracle. "Good work, Zix. You and the others did most of the building." "Only because you showed us how," Zix replied. "We could never have thought of such things ourselves." This was the problem Jake faced every day. No matter how much he tried to give credit to the Vorthaki for their own work, they always said it was his wisdom that made everything possible. They saw him as the source of all knowledge and goodness. A commotion in the town square caught Jake's attention. A group of Vorthaki had gathered around someone lying on the ground. Jake hurried down to see what was happening. An elderly Vorthaki male lay unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. His shell had turned a pale gray color, which Jake had learned was a sign of serious illness. The gathered Vorthaki looked at Jake with desperate hope in their large eyes. "Please, Kathran Jack," said one of them, "save Mektar. He is our best storyteller. Without him, we will lose our old tailies." Jake knelt beside the sick Vorthaki and used his medical scanner. The readings were bad. Mektar was suffering from organ failure, probably due to age and the hard years during the war. Jake's medical supplies could make him comfortable, but they could not cure him. "I'll do what I can," Jake said, though he knew it was probably hopeless. Jake carried Mektar to the medical bay and started treatment. He gave the old Vorthaki medicine for pain and used the remaining advanced drugs to support his failing organs. For 3 days, Jake worked without rest, trying everything he knew. On the 4th day, Mektar's eyes opened. The gray color had left. His shell and his breathing was steady. Jake checked the scanner readings twice to make sure. Somehow, impossibly, the old Vorthaki was recovering. Word spread through the town like wildfire. Catherine Jack had brought someone back from the edge of death. The Vorthaki gathered outside the medical bay, making their musical clicking sounds that Jake had learned was their way of praying. Jake tried to explain that it was just medicine, that human doctors did things like this all the time. But the Vorthaki did not see it that way. They had watched their Catherine fight death itself and win. To them, it was proof that Jake was no ordinary being. Mektar recovered completely within a week. The first thing he did was compose a song about Jake's miracle. The song spread to other Vorthaki settlements, carried by traders and travelers. Soon, Jake's reputation reached far beyond his small town. New groups of Vorthaki began arriving almost daily. They came from hundreds of miles away, bringing their sick and injured. They had heard about the Catherine who could cure any disease, who could bring the dead back to life. Jake found himself overwhelmed. His medical supplies were running dangerously low, and he could not help everyone who came seeking healing. Some of the sick were too far gone to save. Others had diseases that Jake did not understand. When Jake could not cure someone, the Vorthaki did not blame him. Instead, they said it was because the person lacked faith or had not lived a good life. They created explanations that made Jake's failures seem like moral judgments rather than medical limitations. This worried Jake more than anything else. The Vorthaki were building a religion around him, with rules and beliefs that he had never taught them. They were turning him into a god who rewarded the good and punished the wicked. One evening, as Jake worked late in his laboratory, Zix came to him with a troubled expression. "Catherine Jack, I need to ask you something important." "What is it, Zix?" "The people are saying that you are not like other beings. They say you are eternal, that you will never die and will always protect us. But I have watched you grow older. Your hair has gray in it now, and you move more slowly than before. Are you truly immortal?" Jake put down his tools and looked at Zix carefully. This was a conversation he had been dreading for years. "No, Zix, I am not immortal. I am just a human being like the humans who fought in the war. I will grow old and die, just like any other creature." Zix's compound eyes widened. "But if you die, who will protect us? Who will teach us? Who will heal our sick?" "You will," Jake said firmly. "You and the others have learned so much. You can take care of yourselves now." "No," Zix said, shaking its head. "We are nothing without you. You are our Catherine, our guide, our protector. We cannot survive without you." Jake realized that he had made a terrible mistake. By helping the Vorthaki, by teaching them and healing them, he had made them completely dependent on him. They saw themselves as helpless without his guidance. They had forgotten that they were capable of thinking and acting for themselves. The next day, Jake tried an experiment. He announced that he needed to meditate and would not be available for advice or help for 3 days. He locked himself in his quarters and waited to see what would happen. At first, the Vorthaki panicked. They gathered outside his door, clicking anxiously and begging him to come out. But when Jake did not respond, they slowly began to make decisions. On their own, a broken water pipe was repaired by a team of young Vorthaki who had watched Jake do similar work. When a dispute arose over food distribution, the elder Vorthaki formed a council and resolved it fairly. A sick child was treated by Keth, who had learned enough from Jake to handle simple cases. When Jake emerged after 3 days, he found the town running smoothly. The Vorthaki had proven they could take care of themselves, but they did not see it that way. Catherine Jack, said one of the elders, we knew you were testing us. Your wisdom guided us even when you were not present. We felt your spirit watching over us. Jake wanted to scream in frustration. No matter what he did, the Vorthaki found ways to give him credit for their own abilities. They refused to believe they could succeed without his divine influence. That night, Jake stood alone on the observation deck, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the human fleet was continuing its journey. Maybe they still planned to come back for him. Maybe they had forgotten he ever existed. Either way, Jake knew his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a stranded soldier. He was the center of a growing civilization, a figure of worship and devotion. The Vorthaki had given him a role he had never wanted but could not escape. Below him, the town was peaceful. Soft lights glowed in the windows of the houses. Families of Vorthaki were safe and warm, their children growing up in a world where they did not have to fear hunger or cold or war. Jake had given them that safety. But in return they had given him something he was not sure he could handle. The burden of being their god. As he watched, more lights appeared on the horizon. Another group of travelers was approaching, probably bringing more sick people for him to heal. More problems for him to solve. Jake Morrison, the abandoned human soldier, had become something he had never imagined. He was the Catherine, the protector, the miracle worker, and whether he wanted it or not, he was becoming the most important figure in Vorthaki history. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but Jake knew he could not abandon these people. They needed him, even if they needed him in ways that scared him. He would continue to help them, to teach them, to heal them. But he would also try to find a way to make them independent, to show them that they were strong enough to stand on their own, even if they never believed him. 20 years had passed since Jake Morrison was left behind on Vorthak. His hair was now completely gray, and deep lines marked his weathered face. At 52 years old, he moved more slowly than before, but his mind remained sharp. The small refugee camp had grown into a city of over 10,000 Vorthaki, the city they called Catherine Dal, which meant place of the protector in their language. It sprawled across the valley floor, with clean streets, running water, and buildings made from local stone and metal. Gardens provided fresh food year-round, and workshops produced tools, medicines, and clothing. Jake sat in his study, looking over the sacred texts the Vorthaki had created. These were not religious books, though the Vorthaki treated them as such. They were copies of technical manuals, philosophy books, and Jake's own journals that he had shared over the years. The Vorthaki had learned to read English and copied every word he had ever written down. Zix, now an adult with dark markings that showed its age and wisdom, entered the study carrying a bundle of papers. Zix had become the head of what the Vorthaki called the Order of Scribes, keepers of Jake's teachings. Catherine Jack, Zix said, we have finished copying the medical texts you shared last month. The healers in the outer settlements will be able to learn the proper treatments now. Jake looked at the carefully written pages. The Vorthaki scribes had beautiful handwriting, and they never made mistakes. They treated every word Jake spoke as precious truth that must be preserved exactly. Good work, Zix, but remember, these are just guidelines. Healers need to think for themselves and adapt to new situations. Of course, Catherine Jack, your wisdom teaches us that we must use our minds, not just follow rules blindly, Jake winced. Even when he tried to encourage independent thinking, the Vorthaki turned it into another piece of divine wisdom. Everything, he said, became part of their growing collection of sacred teachings. A young Vorthaki messenger rushed into the study, its shell bright with excitement and fear. Catherine Jack, ships have appeared in the sky. They are not like any ships we have seen before. Jake's heart stopped. After 20 years, he had almost given up hope of rescue. He hurried to the base's sensor station, which he had kept maintained. All these years, the screen showed 3 large ships in orbit around Vorthak. Jake zoomed in and felt his blood turn cold. The ships had Zentari markings. The Zentari were humanity's enemies from the war. They were tall, 4-armed warriors with gray skin and no mercy for anyone who opposed them. If they had found Vorthak, it meant they were expanding into this region of space, and they would not be happy to find a thriving civilization where they expected an empty planet. Jake activated the communication system and tried to contact the ships. After several minutes, a harsh voice answered in the Xanthari language. Jake's military training had included basic Xanthari, enough to understand simple conversations. This is Commander Zektar of the Xanthari Exploration Fleet. We claim this planet for the Xanthari Empire. All inhabitants must surrender immediately or face destruction. Jake switched to Xanthari to reply. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human military. This planet is under the protection of the Earth Alliance. A pause, then laughter, cold and cruel, impossible. The humans fled this region 20 years ago. They left no ships, no bases, no protection. You lie. I am here. I have been here for 20 years. One human? Against 3 warships? You amuse me, human. We will take this planet and its inhabitants. They will make good slaves for the Empire. The communication ended. Jake stared at the blank screen, his mind racing. 3 Xanthari warships carried enough firepower to destroy every settlement on Vorthak. He had no weapons that could threaten them, no way to fight back, but he had something else. He had 10,000 Vorthaki who believed he could work miracles. Jake called for the city's leaders to gather in the main hall. Word spread quickly, and soon hundreds of Vorthaki filled the space. They looked at Jake with complete trust, waiting for their Kathran to tell them what to do. My people, Jake began, using the formal words they expected from him. Ships have come to our world. The beings on those ships want to take you as slaves and destroy everything we have built. Worried clicking filled the hall, but no one panicked. They waited to hear what their protector would do. I will not let this happen, Jake continued. But I need your help. All of you must do exactly as I say, without question, without delay. Can you do this? Yes, Kathran Jack, they replied in unison. We trust you completely. Jake had spent 20 years building hidden defenses around the planet using salvage technology and Vorthaki engineering. The gravitational resonance devices were his secret weapon, based on theories he had studied in the military academy. If he activated them all at once, they would create a gravitational storm that would tear apart any ship in orbit, but the process would also destabilize the planet's core. Vorthak would become uninhabitable for any spacefaring species. The Vorthaki could survive because they were adapted to the planet's natural gravity, but Jake would not. He had always known this day might come. He had prepared for it, but he had hoped he would never need to use his final weapon. Listen carefully, Jake told the assembled crowd. I am going to perform the greatest miracle you have ever seen. I will drive away the enemy ships and protect our world forever. But to do this, I must give up my physical form. I will become one with Vorthak itself, watching over you always. The Vorthaki gasped. Some began to weep. Zik stepped forward, its voice shaking. Kathran Jack, there must be another way. We cannot lose you. You are our guide, our protector, our God. No, Jake said firmly. I am not your God. I am your teacher. And the greatest lesson I can teach you is that you are strong enough to protect yourselves. You have learned everything you need to know. You can build, heal, think, and decide without me. But Kathran Jack, this is my final command, Jake said, using the voice of authority that had never failed him. After I am gone, you will not worship me. You will remember me, honor me, but you will not pray to me. You will make your own choices and solve your own problems. You will help those who are weak, protect those who cannot protect themselves, and always seek to learn new things. These are not divine commandments. They are simply the right way to live. Jake looked around the hall at the faces of the people. He had come to love. They had given him purpose when he was lost and alone. They had made him into something greater than he had ever dreamed of being. You must evacuate the city immediately, Jake continued. Go to the deep caves we prepared. Stay there for 3 days, no matter what happens above. After that, you can return and begin rebuilding. Rebuilding? Zix asked. Will the city be damaged? Jake nodded. The gravitational storm will destroy most of the buildings. But you know how to build them again. You have the knowledge, the skills, and the strength. You always did. The evacuation began immediately. The Vorthaki moved with practiced efficiency, taking only essential supplies and heading for the underground shelters. Jake watched them go, proud of how organized and calm they remained even in crisis. When the city was empty, Jake walked to the central control station for the gravitational devices. His hands shook as he entered the activation codes. 20 years of work, 20 years of life, all leading to this moment. The Xanthari ships had begun landing troops on the outskirts of the city. Jake could see them on his monitors, tall gray figures with weapons and armor. They expected to find a helpless population ready for conquest. Instead, they would find empty buildings and one old human who had made a choice long ago to protect the innocent. Jake pressed the final button. The planet trembled. In orbit, the Xanthari ships began to break apart as space itself twisted around them. On the surface, the ground cracked and buildings fell as gravitational waves swept across the world. Jake felt the energy building around him, tearing at his body, pulling him apart atom by atom. But he smiled as the control room filled with light. He had kept his promise. The Vorthaki were safe. His people were free. The gravitational storm lasted for 3 hours. Deep in the caves beneath Cathrin, Dal, 10,000 Vorthaki huddled together as the planet shook around them. The sound was like thunder that never stopped, mixed with the grinding of rock and metal. Many of the younger Vorthaki were frightened, but the elders kept them calm with stories of their Cathrin-esque power. Zik sat near the main entrance to the cave system, listening to the chaos above. Every tremor felt like a knife in its heart. Somewhere up there, Jake Morrison was giving his life to save them all. The human who had found them broken and afraid, who had taught them to heal and build and think, was dying to keep them free. When the shaking finally stopped, an eerie silence fell over the caves. The Vorthaki waited, as Jake had commanded. 3 days. They would wait 3 days before returning to the surface. On the morning of the 4th day, Zix led a small group up from the caves. What they found took their breath away. The city was gone. Buildings had collapsed, streets had cracked open, and strange new rock formations jutted from the ground where the gravitational waves had twisted the earth, but the Vorthaki were alive. The caves had protected them perfectly, just as Jake had promised. At the center of what had been the city, where Jake's control station had stood, there was now a crater filled with glowing crystals. The crystals pulsed with soft light like a heartbeat. When Zix approached them, it could feel a strange warmth, as if something of Jake's spirit remained in the stones. The other Vorthaki began to emerge from the caves. They walked through the ruins with wonder and sadness. Their beautiful city was destroyed, but they were free. The Xanthari ships were gone, torn apart by the gravitational storm. Pieces of alien metal were scattered across the landscape, already being covered by fast-growing plants. "Cathrin Jack saved us," whispered one of the Vorthaki. "He became one with the planet itself." "Look," said another, pointing to the sky. "The stars are different." It was true. The gravitational storm had changed Vorthok's orbit slightly. The planet now followed a new path around its twin suns. The days were a little longer, the seasons a little different. It was as if Jake had remade their entire world to protect them. Zix gathered the surviving leaders together. There was much work to do. They needed to rebuild their homes, replant their crops, and restore their water systems. But Jake had prepared them for this moment. They knew how to do everything they needed to survive. "We will rebuild," Zix announced. To the gathered crowd, "Cathrin Jack taught us well. We have the knowledge and the strength to make our city even better than before." The work began immediately. Teams of Vorthaki cleared rubble and salvaged useful materials. Others began constructing temporary shelters using techniques Jake had taught them. The young ones helped by carrying supplies and tending to the injured. As they worked, they found something wonderful. Hidden throughout the ruins were cache sites that Jake had prepared over the years. Each cache contained tools, medicines, seeds, and detailed instructions for rebuilding. He had planned for this disaster, knowing that his people would need help to start over, but Jake had left them something else, something more precious than any tool or medicine. In the largest cache, Zix found a metal box containing hundreds of recordings. Jake's voice speaking their language, telling stories, sharing knowledge, and giving advice for every situation he could imagine. "My friends," Jake's voice said from the first recording, "if you are hearing this, then I am gone and you are beginning again. Do not mourn for me. I lived a life of purpose because of you. I became something greater than I ever dreamed possible because you believed in me." The Vorthaki gathered around the playback device, listening with tears in their eyes. "I need you to remember something important," Jake's voice continued. "You do not need me to be great. You were always capable of amazing things. I simply helped you see your own strength. Now you must use that strength to build a better world. Build homes for everyone, not just the wealthy. Heal the sick, even if they cannot pay. Protect the weak, especially the children. Learn new things every day and teach others what you know. These are not divine commands. They are simply the best way to live together in peace. Most importantly, do not worship me. I was just a human being, no different from any other. Honor my memory by being kind to each other. That is all the prayer I need." The recordings became the foundation for rebuilding their society. Jake had anticipated every problem they might face and left guidance for solving them. But he had also encouraged them to think for themselves, to adapt his ideas to new situations, and to improve on what he had taught them. Years passed. The new Catherendal rose from the ruins, more beautiful than before. The Vorthaki had learned from their experience with the Zinthari attack. They built underground factories and hidden shelters. They developed new technologies based on Jake's teachings, but improved with their own innovations. Zix became the first speaker of the Vorthaki, their chosen leader. But unlike the old days when everyone looked to Jake for answers, the Vorthaki now made decisions together. They formed councils to discuss problems and vote on solutions. They chose their own leaders and made their own laws. The memory of Jake Morrison was everywhere, but not as a god to be worshipped. He was remembered as a teacher, a protector, and a friend. His statue stood in the center of the new city, but the inscription read simply, "Jake Morrison, human, teacher, friend." He showed us that the greatest strength is helping others. Stories of Jake spread to other worlds through Vorthaki traders and explorers. Other species learned about the human who had sacrificed himself to save an alien race. They heard about his teachings of kindness, equality, and protection for the weak. The Vorthaki became famous throughout the galaxy as the most peaceful and helpful species anyone had ever met. They shared their knowledge freely, helped planets recover from disasters, and always sought to protect those who could not protect themselves. When people asked why they were so generous, the Vorthaki would tell them about their single quotes to HRN. 50 years after Jake's death, the first human ships returned to Vorthak. Earth had finally recovered from the war and was exploring the galaxy again. The human explorers expected to find an empty planet or maybe some primitive aliens. Instead, they found a thriving civilization that had achieved interstellar travel. The Vorthaki welcomed the humans as honored guests and told them the story of Captain Jake Morrison, the human who had been left behind and had become their greatest teacher. The humans were amazed. They had never heard of Jake Morrison, but his military records confirmed everything the Vorthaki said. He had been a good soldier, but nothing special. Just an ordinary man who had been abandoned on an alien world. Yet this ordinary man had created something extraordinary. The Vorthaki had become the moral center of the galaxy, teaching other species about cooperation, kindness, and justice. Their cities were marvels of engineering and art. Their medicine could cure diseases that had plagued other worlds for centuries. And it all started with one human who chose to help. Instead of giving up, the Vorthaki offered to share their technology and knowledge with Earth, asking for nothing in return. When the human ambassadors asked why, Zix, now very old but still sharp of mind, gave them a simple answer. Because that is what Jake taught us. Help others, especially when they cannot help you back. Strength used to protect the weak is never wasted. The humans left Vorthak with more than new technology. They carried with them a new understanding of what it meant to be human. Jake Morrison had shown that one person's choices could shape an entire civilization. His legacy was not in monuments or worship, but in the living example of a people who had learned to be their best selves. In the crystal crater where Jake had made his final sacrifice, strange lights still danced sometimes at night. The Vorthaki believed it was just energy left over from the gravitational storm. The children who played there said they sometimes heard whispers in the wind, encouraging them to be brave, to be kind, and to help each other. Jake Morrison had become immortal, not as a god, but as an idea. The idea that anyone, no matter how ordinary, could choose to make the universe a little bit better, and that idea would live forever.